Okay, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Generative AI News Rundown. This is where we talk about the top generative AI news of the week, and we've got some great stuff going on. Elon Musk wants to stop OpenAI. Google, more intrigue, rumors. Maybe they're further behind. OpenAI declares war. We also have things on Zoom, Alpaca, and Coca-cola. I don't know if we're going to get to all that, but there's so much other news we could talk about this week too. But we do want to get to some of these key items. So everybody who's joining us live, we're here every week, 12 noon Eastern at 12 noon Eastern here on LinkedIn or on YouTube. Please tell us you're here in the comments. Make comments, ask questions. We will respond in real time. And Mikhail Stanislawic is here. He couldn't find it on LinkedIn, so he is here on YouTube, which is great because YouTube works just as well. We're going to have some good conversation today. So hopefully that everyone does that. Maybe Andrew in the background, you can check out to make sure the LinkedIn feed is operating correctly. Okay, so we have a lot of things to get through. It looks like Alan Furstenberg's in LinkedIn, so it is working correctly. So maybe this is user error by Mikhail Stanislawic. But let's talk about Elon Musk, because why shouldn't we talk about Elon Musk? This image is actually from a story from a couple of weeks ago, and maybe we should be talking about Steve Wozniak, but the Future of Institute issued a letter yesterday with the signatory Elon Musk, so that's what all the headlines were, and it said OpenAI must be stopped. We should have a 6-month pause on any type of AI research that might generate a model more powerful than GPT-4. Silke Hahn, editor of Heise Online, the person who broke the story about GPT-4 going to be announced ahead of anyone else. What do you make of this?
Well, my very first emotional impression of the letter was, great, someone says we need to slow down. That was my very first intuitive reaction to it. Then I read the letter and thought, wait a moment. There's a lot of famous names of people, even from Google and from various universities, and not only Elon Musk. So it sounds really convincing from the argument at first sight. It also fulfills the desires of people right now. We are all exhausted after 3 weeks of continuous AI news hitting ground, and a lot of concerns start to rise, and we all would wish for it. But then you see Future of Life Institute. Wait a moment, what's that? Oh, exactly. It's founded by Musk. It's based on his money. It's a long-termism thing. And you see the arguments are kind of vague partially. And it's also, well, actually, do 6 months make a difference? And what about China? Would China stop developing big AI models? What about OpenAI, actually? Would they commit to pushing the pause button? Or some folks like Emad Mostak from Stability AI, he has also signed the letter, Stability AI, Stable Diffusion. He actually didn't have the plans to develop anything within the upcoming 6 months. For him, it would be easy to say, well, I pushed the pause button because he has already pushed it in the past. So that's a little bit of bigotry.
I like the journalist in you, sort of like seeing the headline and being like, yeah, this makes sense. But then like, let's peel back the onion. Well, another journalist here, Eric Schwartz, head writer at Voicebot.ai. What did you make of this?
I mean, it's very silly in some ways, because one thing Elon Musk is famous for is pushing out self-driving cars well before any sort of like safety measurements. I mean, there have been real problems with it, but can you imagine a bunch of car manufacturers writing a letter saying that there should be a pause on developing self-driving cars? No. And
in fact, they've done that. It is state level regulation in the US. They've made it prohibitive to actually have self-driving cars in a lot of states to slow down the adoption.
Sure, but it doesn't actually stop the research or development or efforts to build it, even if beyond Tesla. And even True. Besides the issue of who's writing the letter, which is its own thing, it doesn't make any sense, because it's one of those like, here's what we want with no real explanation of what that looks like, how it happens, who's in charge of it. There's no like regulatory system for basic research in the US or any other Western country. The idea that somehow all the people working on this will just put down their work for 6 months or will work on something else for a while. It's such a nonsense request. It just, all it is a recognition of rapid change and a sort of panicked response to it without any real solution.
I love this comment from Costas, which we just put on the screen. Maybe you cannot keep up with what's happening. And you know what? I empathize with that. I mean, he's a busy guy. He's running multiple companies, and I'm just like running one company, and I'm having trouble keeping up with all that's going on. So a pause might actually let me take a weekend off or something like that, and I have to, play with models all weekend and things like that. So yeah, I think Silke hit on a lot of things here, right? It's very hard to control this. What's China going to do? Is that a thing? Is that an important thing? Are they going to slow down as well? Do they have the same? What about other people who don't sign on to this or who go to jurisdictions which are outside of regulatory control of wherever Musk thinks can control this? Maybe the US and EU. I don't know what he's thinking. But it's not just him. It's Wozniak. The only thing is you see all these people and like Yoshua Bengio. I mean, like he's a giant in this field.
Yeah, I've spoken today with a German artificial intelligence professor, and he said it really struck him when he saw this signature on the letter, and it really made him pause and read the letter and think, perhaps I have missed something. And I think the intention of the letter, we need a pause. This is common ground for a lot of people, and not all read the letter in the same way. And I think the interesting reaction to it is the psychological reaction of a lot of people. For example, Timnit Gebru, you would actually expect her to be absolutely in favor of a pause for ethical AI research. She's opposed to the letter for other reasons than other people that are opposed to the letter. And what this letter actually brings up at the moment is how split the AI community is in itself. Like you have a whole set of complex and conflicting points of view, what AI is actually about to be about for humanity, what are the impacts, the serious issues, in which order of magnitude do we have to assess it, and what is the next step? So
yeah, I agree. And I think, and we're going to move on from this because I think we'll have more time to talk about these types of topics going forward. But I think that there's a couple of things that people don't understand as well. All those people who signed, they have objectives. Now, those objectives aren't all aligned among those people, but they're all aligned in that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And their enemy right now is OpenAI because it's way out in front. And actually, if this actually happened, you know what would happen? OpenAI would just solidify their lead, because if everyone else can't do anything, OpenAI actually has this. Even if they signed on to it, it would just sort of lock them in. But the last thing I'll tell people is 6 months for what purpose? 6 months. And has there ever been a new policy implemented in 6 months for something complex and new like this? No. And no one agrees on the risks and how likely they are and how severe they'll be. All right, Eric, you can have the last word and then we're moving on.
I was just going to say, and not to be totally cynical, but how many of the people who signed this letter in 6 months would coincidentally suddenly have a generative AI product of their own ready to go?
Exactly. Okay, we're moving on to the next story. And I have this. I shared my thing wrong. I'll bring this up in just a second. But the next story is about Google, ChatGPT, how they're training Bard, how they're working internally. Silke, you have a story on this. Tell me about it.
Yeah, very early this morning, I checked my Google AMP thread, and the first story that hit my eye was the information about actually Google is said to have trained their Bard model on ChatGPT conversations, and I even requested a paid subscription to the paper in order to read the full story, because it really it sounded so absurd to me. Like, why the hell should Google do this? Is this real, or is it already the 1st of April, April Fool's Day, or is this real? Can this really? My story from today, yes. Actually, it seems to have been vetted, and the story sounds quite accurate. An AI engineer, Jacob Devlin, raised concerns some months ago within the Google C-level. Sundar Pichai, Jeff Dean, and others, and said, hey, I'm aware that the Google Bard research team is using ChatGPT conversations and a lot of them in order to train our Bard model. I'm opposed to it, and we should stop. Actually, they seem to have stopped. Some Google folks raised concerns it might be against the OpenAI policy.
Maybe they did. So here's my thing. So I've got a Synthedia newsletter coming out on this, like right after the show. It's already written. So there's two different things in the information story. So one is about DeepMind and Google Brain or Google AI more broadly working together for the first time because they have a common enemy. Again, this common enemy idea. So that's somewhat interesting, but I would say the takeaway from that is, Google realized 6 weeks ago they're further behind than they thought they were. And they're behind in a number of different ways. They're behind in the foundation model, which everyone recognizes, but they're actually behind in alignment, which OpenAI has been working at extensively since the 2020 launch of GPT-3, working with third parties, which led to InstructGPT, ChatGPT, and the GPT-4 model. They're behind in ecosystem development, partners. They're behind in mind share and they're behind in market share. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a second, there's a crisis here. Now we're going to get people. Now my takeaway on that one is it's actually going to slow the process down. We can talk about that later if we want, because you're taking people who don't work together today and basically have different objectives in the world, and now you're forcing them to work together. It's going to it might increase the likelihood of success long term, but it'll probably slow it down.
It's been called a forced marriage inside of this report.
Yeah, and forced marriages like often don't work very well. So sometimes they do, but not always. But this other thing about this training with ChatGPT data. Okay, so first of all, do we know for sure that GPT-4 was not trained on any data that came from Google Lambda? No, we don't, because what they do is they train on things that are on the internet. And so, yes, AI generated data is in every model. I think there's a high likelihood of this. I think we could also probably say it's a certainty. The second thing is this problematic? If ShareGPT, which is not owned by OpenAI, it's a third party, is that any different from training on data that's in Twitter or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times? If the same data that was generated by an AI model showed up in one of those things, would we then question it? Now, we might question it for other reasons, like, do you have rights to use that? A third-party blog, a research paper that's openly published. All of these things happen. And so to me, this seems like something where you could have a differing set of opinions on whether this is, good or bad. So I question whether there's a terms of service violation here. I think what may be more compelling is, like, do you want Bard to look more like GPT? And maybe you don't. So I don't know, Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think at some point the data they're drawing from second or third hand probably comes from similar places. But also, if you remember, there was letters written by Google's CEO and some of the other executives asking all their employees to spend hours a week engaging with Bard, spotting errors, playing with it, looking for ways to improve it. The idea that at no point they people who were told they should engage with it didn't look at ShareGPT for ideas of what to write is very unlikely. I mean, it's very natural to especially if you're interested in the subject, you're seeing what other people are doing, or you're playing with ChatGPT, and then you're like, well, now I have to play with this one. Oh, I wonder what it will do. Guess what? You're going to start converging on some things. So it may be convergent evolution in some ways, but I don't think it's some sort of underhanded scheme. But that comes from the top. But I also would be shocked if there wasn't some overlap.
Fair enough. Well, and I think, it's really interesting about this information story, the timing of it and the timing of the letter. Clearly they're all post GPT-4, which, is turn some heads because there's a lot of capability there. I think there's a lot of overstated capability. People are projecting onto that some things that maybe are not there, at least are not proven to be there yet, but okay. But this also came after what I would call an open declaration of war by OpenAI on the rest of the industry, saying, oh, by the way, we're going to be an application provider too. We're not just going to be a model provider. We're not just going to be a technology provider. we have an application and we just prove that to you by saying, oh, by the way, ChatGPT, it's not a demonstration product where we're just charging money so we can cover our costs. Oh, we're going to develop a partner ecosystem with plugins. This looks like a direct assault on Chrome.
Yeah, and not just develop an ecosystem, have developed an ecosystem. There was someone who did a little jailbreaking on it and found dozens of ready-to-go plugins rolling out soon. So it's not just a here's our initial layer. It's here's our outline for the next year or 2 years.
Yeah, they've been working on this for a while. What do you think about this, Silky? So the idea that they're going to do plugins, it's going to significantly expand what you can do with ChatGPT, because they're going to borrow both from the capabilities and the trust of some of these third parties, whether it's OpenTable or news organizations or something else, in order to provide more value in that ChatGPT environment.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for OpenAI/Microsoft to build an ecosystem of business connections and partners who actually can make profit and sense of the API use, the plugins. And then there's actually some rumors are that GPT-4 is actually the multimodal aspect of it might be a plugin functionality by itself. So actually this model, we don't know much about the structure, about the architecture, about what is it actually. Some things might be plugged in functionalities, not trained in, but plugged in. So actually, I think that there are some really, really interesting plugins like the Wolfram plugins, Wolfram Alpha and Wolfram, because it's statistical AI and symbolic AI plugged in together, and you have a really accurate search machine if you use Wolfram. I've seen that. There was a very long blog entry by Wolfram himself, Stephen Wolfram, and it was fascinating to see you can ask questions that the model, it stops the model from hallucinating, and it becomes very multi-step. It without asking for it, it explains in multi-step steps what it actually does and how it comes to its conclusions, and it gives accurate numbers, and it can browse the internet. So this is the most powerful plugin in my eyes at present.
Well, yeah, and it shows the model of essentially there's this idea of you talked about the symbolic model versus the generative model, and so these neural symbolic systems, are going to be really powerful. And what they're showing is through plugins, what I can do is I can access what they're calling it's really a retrieval model. It's going out into something that's could be deterministic or it could be something else. It could be a probabilistic, but it is something that has a different set of trust and generation capabilities, because it's not generating something new. It's actually pulling from something that exists, and those could be procedures, those could be actual content or things like that. But this idea that people were saying, oh, it doesn't connect to the internet. Well, yeah, it does connect to the internet now because you have these plugins, and you're just going to have all these services that come on top of it. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right that it's the plugins, the services on top. I think that what OpenAI is doing is not just trying to replace Chrome, but it's sort of nipping at the Apple App Store in a way. It's setting itself up to be a hub for everything, because the idea is that the AI will, as you said, will go out and get the information for you and put it together for you in helpful ways. It goes back to sort of pre-internet ideas of what an internet would be, where it's you ask your computer to do something for you and it goes ahead and does it, rather than you taking all the steps yourself. And I think that there's so much potential there for good and bad, but and I think it's also worth remembering so much of what OpenAI is doing is powered by Microsoft. So unlike some of the other potential disruptive startups that have come and gone, or that could come and go, there's no potential shutdown for OpenAI, and I think that even now we're still seeing very much the early days of what it has in mind. And I think that Sam Altman has shown, and his team has shown, that they are nothing if not ambitious in their long-term goals.
Well, and I did notice that Silke mentioned that OpenAI and Microsoft introduced this feature, which I think is also very important. And we have this comment from Alan that the plugins are remarkably powerful in concept, but there's a lot of open questions still. So this is a really good point. One of the things that we were looking at is how the plugins actually work, which is a little unclear in the documentation. So for example, you could create a plugin that is basically the equivalent of prompt priming. So it actually does that for you. Right now, it looks like it's mostly these retrieval model concepts, but really useful to think about this idea. If it is prompt priming, then it could actually add a lot to the ability of people to use the models more effectively. But I think the most important thing to me is, up to this point, OpenAI has positioned itself as a technology provider. It is now saying it's an application provider too. It's competing with some of the companies that actually use its technology, its underlying technology. Many of those have been thinking about diversifying anyway. This might accelerate that process. But I'm not positive that before the success of ChatGPT, they intended to be an application provider. But as soon as they saw it take off, and Sam Altman in his interview with Lex Friedman this week, which was really fascinating, I recommend people take a look at it. He expected it to be successful, but he didn't say he expected it to be an application that they were putting out into the market, that they built an ecosystem around. And I think that its success has changed everything. It's shown people how far along they are. And it's a bandwagon that a lot of developers want to support and get on board with.
Yeah, I think there is an element of the hype cycle that people have talked about, and a question of how is this truly going to last a long time. But one way to essentially, if OpenAI and ChatGPT and Bing AI and so on can demonstrate that they're at least as reliable as using Google generally is in terms of search, plus has all of these other elements to it that will keep people coming back to it, then absolutely, I think it's going to stick around. It does involve a different way of thinking about the internet that I don't know how easy it is to adapt, of sort of treating it as an individual rather than searching and looking at a lot of things individually.
So, Paulo,
pardon interruption. There seems to be a small competition ongoing right now between Microsoft and OpenAI in which ways they use actually the GPT-4 model. Like, you have a lot of confusion between customers and the audience. Actually, okay, there's Bing, and they also offer me already the GPT-4 model, and then I have ChatGPT, and then I have GPT-4 the API. Which do I actually use for what, and why do I actually need OpenAI if I can access it via the Bing?
Well, the models are tuned. The models are tuned differently. So, so there are certain types of things in terms of the performance, particularly on the creative elements, that you're not going to get from Bing in quite the same way. But yeah, it's a good point. I mean, they're competing with Microsoft. They're competing with their customers across the board. And it's really important. I think, we'll just I think it's an open question, but the important thing is now we know that OpenAI is working across the stack. Now, they're not working at they have their own hosting service, but they're not really working at the cloud hosting cluster. They're not working at the chip layer, right? So not like NVIDIA, which is going the entire stack right now, but really interesting. And João Paulo said, hey, it's the new internet, and we'll see.
And don't forget the others, GraphCore and others. They are not on the news screen today, but NVIDIA is not the only company that is dealing with hardware and starting to develop new architectures, which might revolutionize AI on a different level. Yeah, so we'll see hardware progress as well, and sparsity, and a lot of interesting things that also apply already probably to GPT-4, but we don't have a confirmation on it. We can only guess.
Got it. All right. And I'll direct people to the chat in LinkedIn. Brian Owens talking about a new file to the FTC by CAIDP. I haven't read that yet, so I'm not going to weigh in on it, but that might be something that'll interest people. Breaking news here on the gain rundown. All right, so let's hit one more ChatGPT thing really quickly, and we'll move on. They actually had a big security vulnerability in a patch last week. I did a write-up on it. Eric did as well. I don't know if Silke, if you covered this.
I personally did not, because my colleagues already covered it. Yeah, so I'm aware that something happened.
Yeah, it seemed like a common oversight. And actually, my take on it is, when they decided to become an application provider, they didn't actually, they looked at the functionality of the product and didn't actually really zero in on the new security attack surface or security vulnerability attack surface that was going to arise. And this is precisely where it happened. Shout out to Nagli, who was the one who apparently made them aware of this, and also shout out for him to taking a really good, much better rundown, I think, than OpenAI provided, what actually the sequence events were, what the exploit was, and showing that basically within an hour and a half, they had the whole thing addressed. They took it very seriously, acted very quickly, which you can feel good about. The thing you might not feel good about is the fact that they're moving into a new area. They are people who are used to be technology providers who provide APIs and the security associated with that. But when we talk about the application layer, it's always been their partners, the third parties using it, who have had to worry about that. This is an area that I think was a blind spot for them.
Yeah, they also relied too heavily on the Microsoft competence in this sector, because Microsoft is the platform specialist, and they are their partners. And now you can see what happens if they are trying to be responsible for that too. I mean, I have seen that they have a lot of job vacancies and are looking for jobs, and they pay really high amounts to get people who bring in these features into the company. But there will be a time of interregnum where it doesn't work properly, perhaps. And we have seen one interruption now. But there might be security issues upcoming because, as you say, Brad, they are not used to being an application deliverer yet. And perhaps they haven't yet figured out if they want to be that. I mean, that's the basic conflict any startup has. I mean, OpenAI is not a startup anymore for a long time. Someone from Microsoft, whom I talked to, said, yeah, OpenAI still is a startup. From their point of view, they are still a startup. They have to figure out how to be more professional in that sector, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Eric?
No, I absolutely agree with Silke. I also think it's related to what you were saying before about how they may not have planned for how ChatGPT became popular, and what it means is that, I think if you look at the blog post that OpenAI has published over the last year, you can see them evolving from very technical papers to more and more at least sections that are written for people who are not technical, who are interested in it coming there. Sam Altman announced he's going on a listening tour, essentially, of the country. There's all these elements of shifting from a purely behind the scenes tech provider toward a consumer and commercial technology provider. It's a very different approach on all levels. And I think that security is a very central element to that. And I think it's also notable that Microsoft came out with their Copilot specifically for cybersecurity the same week as this happened. So that OpenAI could theoretically solve.
Apparently, OpenAI was not in the beta program for that.
Right. Well, now they can look at their report and have the AI tell them what went wrong, what to do next time.
All right, let's move on to news. The next one I want to bring up, Eric, you have a story on Perplexity AI knocking down 25 million for conversational search. What's the story here?
Yeah, so we covered Perplexity AI a while back now, I think, and they were sort of one of the earlier companies to get into the conversational side of generative AI with a website and browser extension, and now they've launched an iOS app, and they've raised 25.6 million in funding from some of the big wheels of Silicon Valley.
Wow, what a who's who list that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's led by New Enterprise Associates, which tells you right away this is the blue chip.
So NEA is like they're obviously a tier one, but look at the names of the individual investors.
Yeah, the angels are definitely higher up in the choir, as it were. I was looking at the app, and it is a good translation of what Perplexity offered online in terms of a generative AI chatbot with follow-ups and providing links, which is now very much the thing you need for these things. And notably, it has an audio interactive element where you can say your question or your submission to the AI rather than having to type it out, which I think, especially for mobile devices, is going to be very important, because it can be annoying to have to type very long sentences on a mobile device.
Yeah. So, Silke, have you used Perplexity? We haven't talked about this previously.
No, we have not talked about it. It was recommended to me, actually. It is amongst the recommended tools that during an internal session on AI for editors, AI in our publisher's house was mentioned. So I had heard about it before the news hit ground. So it was one of the tools that offer a bit more reliability, explainability, and trustworthy answers. This was what I was
really good. In fact, it basically does what Bing Chat did before Bing Chat or the new Bing came out. I started using it right after it launched in January, like the new version. There was a version in December which was less capable, but the January version is what's been iterated on recently. And a lot of ways it's like the Google search box from, if people remember when Google first started, just like a blank screen. There's a couple of things around, like warnings, which has become de rigueur in this market. But it's just you enter something in and it gives you the answer with the cited sources. So this answer engine concept has the other things like you'd see with Google, like people also ask type of comments at the bottom. But the key thing is you can also just refine your search by asking it for additional information about something it said, or to clarify something, or to extend the search based on something it said. So I recommend people check it out. I did a review of this way back in January. I think it's still the 4th most popular post that we've had on Synthedia. And so I think people will really like it. I was just interacting with someone over at the company and said, basically 50% of all my search goes through Perplexity now, because Silke, like you and Eric, I spend a lot of my day doing research. And it's just a really simple way to answer little questions. Because those are the things. We have a story, but then this little item comes up and you're like, geez, I really need to provide some context, or I need to have context about it.
Yep.
Perplexity is so good at that, as opposed to just giving me 10 blue links and then me having to spend 20 minutes figuring out which source is good, which one actually answers my question.
And I still remember how painful it was to go to dusty libraries and to spend hours retrieving information in books. Encyclopedia Britannica and stuff like that, and you had to look it up and to check and the opening hours, etc., etc. So it was quite limited, the access to knowledge, and stuff like Perplexity is really interesting. Also for us, we have hundreds of questions when we work on a really good story, and
exactly,
you can answer more questions if it doesn't take so much time and is reliable on top of that, no?
Yeah, and especially because, at least for now, the company, the CEO, has made a point of saying that it is avoiding the one of the ways it's supposed to be better than a regular search engine is that it avoids manipulation by advertisers, by search engine optimization.
Yep.
Those are, I think, hard to measure exactly, but at the very least, you don't have to deal with going into a search engine and seeing the first 3 results are sponsored ads before you get to the actual search results.
Okay. Cool. People should check out Perplexity. Conversational search is here. It is transforming the way we should think about how we work with data, ask questions. So definitely check that out. And then we have this other story that I wanted to talk about, because this was something Silke brought up last week when she was in the audience and chiming in about why are you not talking about Alpaca and what happened there? I think you did a story on this. I couldn't find it in my quick prep, but Eric did. But Silke, tell us what happened here with Alpaca.
Okay, the very rough baseline is a research team from Stanford University trained a model, and they used, I think, the leaked LLaMA, if I'm not mistaken.
Not the leaked version.
Meta made it available to universities, so they had access.
Yeah, exactly. So for them, it was not even a leak. So they were officially accredited to use it. And they also use the ChatGPT API in order to create a huge training set of question answers in order to train their model for a very low price. So binge learning very quickly and for a very low budget. And I think the whole setup cost them about $600.
Yeah, but apparently there's a difference in getting your data, training and inference costs, I think is one of the things that came up. But Eric, what you delved into this too. What else? What did you find?
Yeah, it's that interesting the give and take of crowdsourcing your research is that you can put out these research models, and Meta wants academics and scientists to play around with this and come up with new models and to develop new ways to use their what they've already put together. But the problem is that it doesn't necessarily work, because that's how research and development happens, is that there's problems, and that you can spend $600 building it, but if you use it a lot, it's going to cost a lot of money to keep sending data to and from the model. And then of course there's issues of how well it will behave. I mean, this isn't quite as bad as when Meta put out their Galactica LLM. Which they put out a public demo for about 3 days and then had to shut down because of how just awful it was how awfully it was performing at writing academic papers. But it's a point toward the way that OpenAI has been creating stuff, which is that it's all behind the scenes until it's ready for public consumption. I just think that the academic crowdsourcing is not necessarily going to be effective when it comes to expensive projects like generative AI.
Well,
it's a proof of it's a proof of concept more than a real world model. In a way, it shows it could be done. It's possible to do it on a low budget. But then again, the quality is another question, the quality of the output, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. Well, yeah, and we have this alignment issue. So a lot of people think of alignment as is the UI, like ChatGPT. It did this alignment in the UI, but they also had alignment on the output. That was very important. Now, they didn't have 100% alignment because some of the things they didn't like in terms of how it was generating the output. They have hallucinations, but I think we underestimated our peril taking some of these models in and then expecting them to have the guardrails we want on the output, the UI and user interaction model we want on the input. And so it's just like the model itself is only part of the process. And I think this is what, in some ways what Google may be facing in terms of, maybe they're further behind in alignment than they are actually in model performance. And then there's the cost associated with it. So I think like this is like non-trivial. The other thing, we've seen some fails that have come up recently, which I don't think we have time to get into today, but people are using small models, and small models have different types of problems. Sometimes they're trained on less data, less guardrails, more hallucinations, more likely to be bad actors. So yeah, this is challenging. Okay, so let's move on to our last two stories.
Probably highly efficient for disinformation campaigns. So for that, they could work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like
for bad information.
Power to the people.
The
individual, like there's no monopoly on information distribution and creation anymore. So anyone can do it. Good and bad actors, I guess. Okay, so Zoom's creating a smart companion. This isn't like we were talking about the titans of the industry sort of clashing. This is much more on the application layer. Not that Zoom isn't a titan in its own space, but just another example. We could have brought Opera up here as well because we've talked about Opera in the past, but some of their tools went live this past week. But Zoom's creating the smart assistant, and I think it's really interesting. Like the point that I take from this is the generative AI tools extend the value, or enhance the value that some of these solutions are already providing. Like the summarization features are going to be better, but they also extend the value, and they're being used, I think, as a bridge by some of these companies to get into other areas of the enterprise than they would normally touch.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, the Zoom IQ assistant There's a reason that when it first came out, it was specifically for the enterprise sales model for Zoom. It wasn't just a consumer tool, but there's a lot of themes that you can see being replicated across all of these platforms, all of these tools, and we had not that long ago the big thing was accurate meeting transcriptions, automatic transcriptions, and now it's can you summarize those? Can you parse the discussions to figure out what was decided of what should happen next, or who should take on what task? And you put that into bullet points. I mean, if you have an AI that can do that, whether it's based on OpenAI's models or anyone else's, then suddenly you have a feature that will keep people either using or maybe continuing or starting to use a platform like Zoom, which has a lot more competition than it used to. Even though Skype may not be one of them anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one of the things that I would just bring up in this space is that generative AI enables a lot of these companies to easily do something that they shouldn't actually bother with. And so one of the things I saw in there was like, Zoom also wants to become an assistant. So like this is the larger theme here that we want to talk about, is that every application is getting a co-pilot, because LLMs make this easy. But because you have this co-pilot that's so capable, you can do things that maybe aren't part of your core value proposition, like Zoom, like wanting to create emails for you. Like, come on. Like, that's a step too far. I mean, being able to integrate with other processes, making your application stickier, enhancing what you can do. Okay, makes sense. But like, all of a sudden, is Zoom going to become our CRM? I think that's going to be a step too far for them. What do you think, Silke?
I think, as Eric has said before, for the plugins, we are seeing the very early development of something. We see also some experimental implementations, and I think those people that implement them are still trying to figure out what can actually be done. Like the Wolfram plugins, 2 weeks ago, they even didn't know if it was possible to do it. And also Microsoft has implemented ChatGPT into the Skypes. So a lot of people are trying to do the same thing. And someone from Microsoft gave me a phone call. Hey, you have overlooked something. We have actually integrated ChatGPT into Skype. Nobody has written about it. This is a small gold nugget. Please pick it up. So this was someone from the spokesperson of Microsoft.
Did you do a story on this?
I actually dropped it to a colleague of mine who was already on a story and integrated it into her.
I was going to say, like, is anyone still using Skype? I'm trying to understand that.
Actually, a day before that conversation came up, I had dug it up from the grounds. I have buried it for about 4 years, I think. And I got an invitation for a Skype call after 3 or 4 years for the first time.
Like, in Microsoft for a while had that as like an enterprise solution, but now they have Teams, so they don't want people using Skype. They want them in the.
It's kind of strange, and I also didn't know. And it was kind of intrusive. I opened Skype the day before, and quite unexpectedly, there was this ChatGPT offering its presence and telling me, hey, I want to be part of your chat. And I thought, no, I don't want anybody else to be part of my private chat. That's none of your business. Keep out. It even lowered my trust for Skype, because I thought, okay, so they are recording my conversation eventually, and they are using it for me. Where are the policies of what actually are you doing with my data? Hey, so it raised some questions. Yeah.
I would also say the one thing that makes generative AI very similar to other kinds of technology or the hype cycle, as they put it, is that there is often this cycle where people talk about putting every function into one platform, and then the next time around, it's all about dividing everything up and having a unique specific function for every feature. Every platform can do one thing really well and ignores everything else. And people go back and forth between wanting to have everything all in one place and wanting to separate it all out to perform better within those specific functions. And I think at the moment it's very much in the combination phase of things. Whether or not that's going to last is debatable, though.
On that same thing, that reminds me, we were supposed to talk about Canva today. Well, maybe we'll pitch that the next week. It's the same story essentially, although much further along than Zoom. So that's really interesting. Okay, so we're running a little bit long here. We're going to close out today with a discussion of code because I just thought this was interesting. This is also more on the image side. So we've been talking a lot about the text side. So Coke actually worked with this new collaboration between OpenAI and Bain and Company. I'm not really sure what Bain was doing here, but maybe they did the strategy. And they have a customized Dall-e solution. And so you can go in, and I did this. And by the way, if you're watching this watching this right now, or you watch this before the 31st of 2023, you can actually go in and do this yourself. You can submit something. And what do you get out of submitting? Well, if you're one of the winners, your artwork can be on billboards in Times Square and London Piccadilly Circus. And then if you're the top 30, you get to do this all expense paid trip to Atlanta. And you work with their there's like a workshop, and you work with the Coke global brand team on something. So maybe there's some honor associated with it. The interesting thing is I did notice that all the artists who are part of this will be credited for their work. But I also noted that the word paid was not in there. But I think what's really interesting to me is you go in and there's all these Coke assets. You can select a Coke assets to start, so there's like hundreds or maybe thousands of them. And then it puts it on a page, and then there's blank spot around it. You can make it larger, smaller. You can erase parts of it. And then you put your prompt in, and the Dall-e solution fills in all the gaps, whatever is available. So there is actually something that's very interesting here around creativity. It's a different implementation of what we would normally call in painting or out painting, which are features of these models. It's nothing new that a big brand would crowdsource something as a cheap way, or maybe just a better way to run a marketing campaign. But this is an interesting creative application of text image generators.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not going to be unique. I think, unless it's a total disaster, maybe then the companies will be cautious. But I think the what is it they call it, create real magic idea is very much going to be something people are excited to play with, at least right now. And one of the things we've talked about when it comes to generative art especially, is that it's not that it's creating brand new, never thought of ideas, but it's going to combine and extrapolate ideas in ways that maybe are less well known, or that people haven't seen much of before. So this may be a way for Coca-Cola to really have an edge in terms of whatever the next idea is, even if it turns out to be, as we've discussed so much with generative art, a teddy bear and an astronaut outfit.
Yeah. Do humans actually create original ideas? I mean, is everything derivative? As the TED Talk asserts?
Eric and I have had an interesting conversation before we came online.
It's not that humans can't be original. It's just that it gets harder and harder the more extensive cultural memory is. And
sure,
we have images going back hundreds and thousands of years now. So it's hard to imagine something would be created by a human that isn't at least related to something in that size database.
Final thoughts on this? Okay.
We circle around very old and structural patterns and images, like C.G. Jung and other psychologists have been focusing on that. And if you look at art history, also prehistoric art, you can see a lot of the creativity is repetitive in some ways. So there are certain patterns repeating over and over, and the way how people relate to them and how they actually try to make sense of them makes them unique, perhaps. But the patterns themselves are not especially original or creative. I mean, they are only there's a limited way of what can you do with a piece of chalk and a white wall. I mean, between it's completely white and it's completely black, and what type of patterns can you draw on it? It's a limited amount of options. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing I think is that, or my key takeaway here is that we're just scratching the surface on what we can do with generative AI, whether it's in these application providers, or particularly when we get into what I would consider to be the end users here. In this case, it's a corporation, but there's a lot more to come. I think this has been really fun. This has been a packed thing. We ran long again. We've got to figure out a way to get this a little bit shorter, but each of these topics that we talked about, we skipped 7 or 8 different topics that I would have loved to have talked about today. Each of them requires a few minutes to like get the story down. So I really appreciate everybody coming out today. Silke Hahn, thanks for joining us. This has been great to get your perspective. Will you promise to come back at some point in the future?
Yeah, sure. I really enjoyed the conversation. And last week when I was in the back seat and just watching you on the big screen, I also enjoyed that because it's actually very interesting to see how other people, what different perspectives and views, some things are similar. And then you have brought up topics that I had not thought about. So it's actually, inspiring to be part of that and to also to just listen and to let it sink and something new comes up. Refreshing. Thank you.
Well, great. It was awesome to have your perspective today. It was awesome also to have the honor of your presence, the person who wrote the GPT-4 story on Game. So you'll be forever known by me, at least, for that. I'm sure that you've done much more significant things in your life.
Yeah, I'll be on the radio in the United States quite soon again. So I have some invitations pending. So we'll hear and see each other again.
Okay, Eric Schwartz, yes. Thank you as well for your comments. I'm Brett Kinsella. I'm the host of Gain, but everyone should check out voicebot.ai, where Eric writes every day. I write there occasionally. And the Synthedia newsletter, synthedia.substack.com, if you want to get the in-depth daily activity here. And Silke Hahn is over at ISA Online. Check her out. Follow her on Twitter. A great contributor to this space. Thanks, everybody. I think that's going to be it for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.